Parsha Pairings with Jeff and Sherry. I'm Jeff Friedlander.
And I'm Sherry, and we're so glad you've joined us today. I want to encourage you to go out and subscribe to our YouTube channel at B1 Ministries. Be sure to click the bell there so you'll be notified every time we upload a new video. And you can also download our app, B1 Ministries, and it has all the Parshas on there and the pairings as we upload videos there.
All right. So, Sherry, this week we're in Parsha Matot, Masei, which is a double portion this week. Sometimes the Parshas are put together, two back to back, and then instead of doing them separate weeks, they do them the same, and that's the case this week. It's Matot, Masei. Matot means tribes, and Masei means journey. It also means to pull up stakes or to break camp and to set out. So it's got a kind of a big... it kind of really means what we're talking about this week, because this is the end of the road, actually.
Yeah.
This is Numbers chapter 30, verse 2 through Numbers chapter 32, which will close us out the book of Numbers and honestly close out their journey. Masei is Numbers 33 through 36, which is the end of the book. Haftorah this week is Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 4 through chapter 28, verse 3 and 4. And the Brit Kadashah, or apostolic readings this week, are Luke 13, 1 through 9, and Mark 11, 12 through 23. And so this brings us to the close, as I said, of Bamidbar, of the book of Numbers. Our story began back in Parsha Balak in Numbers 22, is going to get resolved now at this point today with this opening chapter. And we're going to stay with Israel in a mountainous region of Moab just east of the Jordan. So they are just on the edge, getting ready to cross over. And so Matot picks up the story in Numbers chapter 30 and verse 2, and we're picking up off the Parsha last week of Pinchas.
Right. So just as a quick review, we ended, the Parsha ended with the celebration of the Feast of the Lord, and just kind of a review of this again. And the Israelites were to what they were to do when they got into the Promised Land. And now we're going to kind of pick up on this place of some of the regulations that are dealing with vows.
Yeah.
The importance of vows and how God looks at them and deals with them. And we start up in verse 2 that says, whenever a man makes a vow to Adonai or swears an oath to obligate himself by a pledge, he is not to violate his word, but to do everything coming out of his mouth. Pretty straightforward. If you say it, do it.
Yeah. Your word is your bond.
Your word is your bond. A couple of things I want to pull out in the Hebrew here, these words. So this word vow is the word nedar, and it means a promise. This is usually something in a positive nature.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to do this for you in a positive thing.
Yeah.
But we also see that when you're making an oath, that's also something that's binding. This word is shibu'ah, and it means an oath or a curse. So this has kind of got that idea of, even if I'm going to do something good for you or I'm cursing, I'm bound by what I say, the words that I say. Now, this phrase here, the obligate himself by pledge, in Hebrew is l'sor isor anafsho. Kind of a fun little thing to say.
Is.
But it literally means to bind his soul with a bond.
That's a big deal.
So you're saying, when I'm saying words and I'm making these vows or I'm making these oaths, I'm binding my soul to your soul.
Wow.
That what I say is going to be done.
And so this is really, if we think about it, it's really a warning from God to the people to say, words do matter. Later we'll read in Proverbs, the power of life and death is in the tongue. So we know that power is in what we say. And here God is going to say, I'm going to hold you accountable. And we see this in Judges chapter 11, this actual vow fulfillment thing come to pass. Japheth has a daughter that tragically dies. He makes a vow to God. If God will give him victory over the Amorites, which are the Lot's descendants, then he says, God, I will donate to you. I will offer up as a sacrifice to you the first thing that comes out of my door when I get home. Well, he wins the battle. He gets home, and it's his daughter who comes out of the door. And in order to fulfill the vow, he must sacrifice his daughter. Now, this is a painful reminder of what a vow can cost us. In this earth, we do get a price to pay when we promise something and have to fulfill it. But some people have asked, how can God do that? Did God really want his daughter to die? And that's a great question.
It is a good
It's
question.
a worthy question to wonder. The heart of God, Ezekiel makes a comment that God takes no pleasure even in the death of the wicked. So we really see God's heart is not to see a daughter like this die.
Right.
But the benefit here that we don't really look at, we got to see, is what his daughter comes to him and says, Father, give me a week with my friends. Let me go with my.
Yeah, they take 2 months.
Let me take some time.
Yeah.
And then I will voluntarily
Yeah.
submit to it. So God holds him to the word. The father wants to not do it, but the daughter understands the value of a vow, and she valued God and the relationship with God more than she valued her own life. So not only did she show us relationship, but she laid down her life for her father's word. It's really a beautiful picture of sacrifice rather than an intention of God doing something negative there.
It's hard to grasp that when you sit back and go, what really happened?
Yeah.
But that just goes to show the power of life and death is in the tongue.
We've got to be careful with our words.
So the chapter goes on. So we have this one set aside thing. When a man makes a vow, he has to keep it. But then we get 3 more stipulations to a vow that deal with women.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because the next 3 vows contrast sharply with the rules for a women's vow, which take up the rest of this chapter. And it explains the circumstances under which women are and are not bound by their words.
Yeah.
So we see the passage explained that the vows are dependent upon the women. So the first one that this parsha deals with is if you're a minor, a young girl who's still in her father's house, if she makes a vow and her father hears it, he can annul it.
Yeah.
He can release her from that vow.
He's responsible for her, so he's responsible for her vow.
Correct. Now, if he ignores it, or if he hears it and doesn't say anything, then she's still bound to her word. But this is a great protection for these young girls.
Yeah.
Because imagine, if she makes this, and let's be honest, sometimes us ladies can be a little extreme when we're upset or mad and maybe make rash vows. And,
I have never known a woman. I'm married and have 3 daughters. I've never known a woman to make a rash statement.
Correct. Not that men don't, but I think it's beautiful that God put this protection in place. That if there is a vow that's made of monetary commitment, maybe, I'll do this for you. Well, she doesn't have resource, like it would be committing something of her father's even. Or anything like that, that it gives her a protection. Now, the second one that it deals with is a woman who is married. So if a woman is married and she makes a vow, same thing. Her husband now has become the caretaker, and if he hears it, he can annul it. So if she makes a foolish vow or a rash vow or something that's not beneficial to the family, the husband can say, no, you're not bound by this anymore. So again, we see this transfer of protection over the women. Then we see something where he talks about if you're married and or widowed or divorced, your vow is your word. You're under the same ruling now as a man because you don't have that covering now. So when you say something, you need to say it carefully and make sure you're ready to be able to fulfill that vow.
And I think the point that's beautiful, kind of, if we could draw back a little bit, last week in the parsha we talked about a woman who, the daughters who said, "Hey, we don't have any, we don't have an inheritance," and they went to Moses and they said, "This isn't right." And Moses talked to God. The law was amended, and they got their inheritance. Now we see God saying, "Okay, ladies, you're also responsible here. I'm going to protect you in this way, but I'm also going to allow you to have, you're going to be responsible for your own word." In other words, there have been a lot of accusations over the centuries about that the Hebrew Bible is some kind of anti-woman book. And if you really start to dig in and see it, it is such a pro-woman book. It's pro-protection, it's pro-care, and it is pro-voice. Women have a voice. They are given a voice of being able to speak into men, being able to speak into life, being able to speak to God, talk to Moses, have prayer,
They have a
etc.
voice
They
and a place.
have a voice and a place.
Yeah.
And the Bible's really clear about that. So we need to always kind of make sure we read the Bible in its full context.
Right.
You know. All right, so we dig into chapter 31. And we get some vengeance going on here. We're going to outline this chapter. We got 7 quick points we want to hit just to kind of give you the picture of this chapter.
Please read
right?
it.
Yeah, it's a good chapter, but you kind of got to get it. So the chapter begins, it's continuing a narrative that comes from chapter 25. So you got to go back, pick up chapter 25,
This
which is
dealing with Balak and Balaam and the curses.
and this is Israel doing sexual immorality, getting involved in all of that with the Moabites and the Midianite women. So this is, they have sinned, they've crossed the line, they're intermixing, intermarrying, and it's just wrong. And so first we're at war, chapter 25, verse 1.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Take vengeance on the Midianites for Bnei Israel. Afterwards you will be gathered to your people."
So that's the chapter 25. Now we're moving forward. Balak and Pinchas have dealt with Zimri and, well, not Balak. Pinchas dealt with Zimri and Cosby in last week's parsha. You can go back and pick those chapters up. You'll probably remember he speared them through, and this is a Midianite prince, princess, and a high tribal leader of the tribe of Simeon. And so this is coming out of that, and Adonai has not forgotten that the horrible act of Balaam that got the Israelites going in that direction.
Yeah.
God's holding this, and he's not happy about it. And so this is to be the last war that Moses is going to lead Bnei Israel in against his own family. Yeah. I mean, this is his people. His calling came when he was with the Midianite people. He's married to a Midianite woman. He has 2 children by this Midianite woman. And his father-in-law, Jethro, was a Midianite priest who helped him in many ways and actually said, "I believe in your God. That's a good God," and all that. And now he's calling war 40 years later. He's calling war against this people. And Sherry, you want to?
Yeah, I think it just reminds us, we talked about this in last week's parsha, but it just reminds us that God might sometimes cause us to choose spiritual family over natural family.
Yeah.
It's he who does the will of the Father.
Yeah.
That's who we call our mishpachah. So then we see something interesting. We see that there's a military formation already in place. Adonai is the Lord of the host. Yeah. He's the one that is calling for this war. This isn't Moses' call. This is Adonai becoming the military leader. And he tells Moses to pull 1,000 men from each of the tribes. So you're going to march against Midian with 12,000 men. Now, what's interesting about that remember, we've already counted them.
Yep.
A couple parshas ago, we counted the military men. So we already know who's of age and who can fight. And if you remember, we also counted how many were in each tribe. And they're not called to war based on proportion of the size of their tribe. Every tribe gives equally.
Yeah, love it.
They all give 1,000 men to the tribe to go to war, and it lets us know that among them he sends Phinehas as the priest. Phinehas goes with them, and I thought this was such an interesting note the Torah makes. Verse 5 says, Phinehas the priest took with him articles from the sanctuary and trumpets for signaling. Now that can be missed sometimes because when you post where we are, we understand trumpets were used in war. We understand the signals, but when you go, wait a minute, here they are. They've been in a desert situation, but they've been in a military formation.
Yeah,
God has been training them. Joshua doesn't go in the next book, right?
Yeah, right?
In Judges, he doesn't just go into the land and guess he knows how to do warfare. So we're seeing the evidence that there's warfare tactics, military already ready. They already have signals with these trumpets. They're going to know when Phinehas blows it.
And then we read about the casualties of the war. We see in the verse that the kings who were among the casualties included King Zur. That's the father of the Midianite princess Cosby, which escalated this whole conflict to begin with. We also read that among the casualties, the death of Balaam, who was the one who encouraged the idolatry to begin with. So God is dealing strongly with the sin of Balaam and with the Midianites and with the Israelites who have mixed there. We also find Moses, number 4, becomes very angry with the commanders. His anger flares in chapter 25, verses 13 through 17. He and Eleazar go out to meet the commanders, and he observes that they have among the plunder the women of Midian. And in verse 15 and 16, this is what he says. You let all the women live. Why? They are the ones, because of Balaam's advice, who caused Bnei Israel to be unfaithful in the matter of Peor, so that the plague was on the community of Adonai. So now, kill all the boys and kill every woman who has been intimate with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has not been intimate with a man. So here we have a vengeance being taken out in Midian. All the women who were able to participate in the seduction must be put to death. And we may ask ourselves the question, well, wait a minute. Why are the sons, if the dads have already become casualties, why are we killing the sons too? They didn't do it. Why are they the victims too? And the reason is the sons carry the family line. They carry the name. They carry the sin in them that it was not eradicated. And it gives a place for the bad apples to rotten up the whole good side. You cannot, it was known in ancient cultures that if you let any of your enemy live, they will grow up to come back to bite you. We still see this today in warfare, particularly in third world countries.
Can I also just add before you talk about the other? No, another thing in ancient Near Eastern culture is that it was a common understanding that the sons would have a responsibility to avenge the death of their fathers. So Moses understands this.
Yeah.
You know, if you let these sons live, they're going to be carrying a vengeance in them to go, I've got to get back at you for killing my father.
Yeah. So he takes out the men, takes out the sons, and then he says the women that have been intimate, they were part of the whole sin.
Right.
So their penalty is death. They're going to die because of that. But the women who haven't participated in that, they can live, and they have an opportunity then to become part of Israel, or go back to Midian and live their own life, do whatever they do, or become part of Israel. Either way, they're allowed to live, and that's a freedom they're given.
And I think a great point to make here on this idea of eradicating the fathers and the sons and all of that, we see this in a mishap with Saul a little bit later on. Samuel instructed Saul to go and to deal with the Amalekites. And he was told to annihilate them completely. Well, Saul goes and half does it.
Yeah.
He ends up keeping the king of Amalek, and Saul has to be the one to actually put Amalek to death. But we find out later in the book of Esther, after Israel has been exiled, Esther has to deal with an enemy of Israel. His name is Haman, and he is a descendant of Amalek.
So when you leave them in place, some generation in the future is going to have to deal with it. All right, fifth, we see a little reference to the red heifer. Moses instructs the men who are at war that they are unclean because they are what's called tameh, as they've come in contact with the dead. And he tells them they have to stay outside of the camp for 7 days. They have to purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th day. So we see Moses is applying what we learned in Numbers 19 about the red heifer.
Right.
And he's saying, hey, you guys have been in war. That's fine. It's good. But you got 7 days now. We got to get you cleaned up. And here's how we do it.
And then they continue cleaning up stuff. All the plunder that they pulled in, all the gold and the silver and the bronze, the iron and the tin, and all the things that they plundered from Midian. In verse 23, we see that anything able to pass through the fire is to be put through the fire, and then it will be clean. It is also to be purified with the water of cleansing,
red heifer,
which is that red heifer water we read about. Anything that cannot withstand the fire is to be put through the water. So not only do you clean yourselves because you're unclean from touching dead, now you can't even bring the things that came out of a camp of dead into your home.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this not too long ago, that there really is power in items. Mm-hmm. You know, we went to on a Caribbean cruise not too long ago, it was a long time ago actually, and we brought home some souvenirs for our children. And I don't know, maybe a couple of years later, we were in a place where the Lord was having us pray over our home to cleanse our home. And so we go into each of the kids' rooms and we ask them, is there anything in here that, you know, we need to pray over, you want to get rid of? Every one of our children brought those souvenirs out and said, there's something about this souvenir that makes me uncomfortable. And we realized it was from a culture where the voodoo was practiced. And so who knows what was picked up, but our children recognized that there's something about this. It's cute, thanks, but no.
Yeah.
So we had a ceremony where we got rid of it and everything. But we see this principle here, and it's probably a wise thing sometimes to look through our houses and to say, what have I brought into my home that might have been used for evil or in a space of evil that could be given an open door into my home.
And the good news is, what he talks about is, items like this can be cleansed. So you can cleanse things because you have power over them. But make no mistake about it, there is spiritual warfare.
I'm just laughing. We put ours in the fire, and apparently it did not survive the fire. So it was not supposed to stay.
It couldn't make it through the water. All right, the last thing is the dividing of the plunder. In verses 25 through 54, we see a counting and a distribution of all the spoils, and everybody benefits. The commanders, the priests, the Levites, the community, everybody gets a portion. And we see a divine protection from the Lord himself. He goes before them, and he says, the commanders said to them, your servants have counted the heads of the men of war under our command, and not one is missing. So we have brought as an offering to Adonai the gold items each of us acquired, armlets, bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and necklaces, to atone for ourselves before Adonai. And this language of gold, it reminds us of another story where the leaders of Israel didn't use the gold as an offering to Adonai, but rather to make an idol about Adonai.
Let me think, Jeff. The golden calf.
Hey, look at there.
The golden calf.
So they've learned now, and they're like, no, we're not building a calf out of our gold here. We're going to take this and offer it. And that brings us to the end of that chapter. We're going to pick up in the next parsha pairings, Numbers chapter 32. Don't miss that one. It's got some richness that is really remarkable. Until then, we thank you for being with us. God bless you, and shalom.
Shalom.